Dear reader, I'm Tony and this is Book Text. It's another Friday Reads, but first, our word of the day is the beautiful word psithurism. Psithurism is a noun meaning the sound of wind through trees. Oh, how poetic. I've actually been finding some of these words in a book that my sister gave me for my birthday called Otherwordly by Liam Mack, illustrated by Kelsey Garrity Riley, and it has these beautiful watercolor illustrations alongside words from various languages and kind of what they mean. It's very beautiful kinds of words. The cover says, words both strange and lovely from around the world. And it's just a beautiful, delightful book about words. So psithurism came from there. Okay, let's talk about the books that I have finished reading in the last week. I finished 2 books. I told you I've slowed down quite a bit, but I finished Candide by Voltaire, and this is, of course, an 18th century French novel that parodies the concept of optimism and some of the romantic literature that was popular in France, among other places, at the time. And I gave this one 3 stars because it's quite, it doesn't age very well. There's a lot of anti-Semitism amongst other racist and sexist issues. So it was hard for me to read it in its original context. I think because the format of the book is quite modern, it's quite updated. So it wasn't as easy, the fonts are very new, so it wasn't as easy to picture it being read in its original context. However, it did make me more interested in reading more 18th century literature. I think that's one of the new loves I've discovered this year from forcing myself to read books I wouldn't normally pick up. And so I'm really excited to move on to more 18th century and kind of really early 19th century literature that I've never read before. So thank you, Candide, for that, but I probably will never read you again. Then I finished The Orphan of Salt Winds by Elizabeth Brooks. This is a really kind of gothic, really atmospheric story about a woman, and the story takes place in 2 times in her life, kind of intermingling between the 2. So when she was young, living as an recently adopted orphan at a house called Salt Winds, which was situated on a marsh in the coast of England, and also later in her life, when she's in her 80s, she's preparing to die, and she's kind of reflecting back and dealing with some of the ramifications of what happened when she was young. So there's a lot of mystery here, and I loved the way that the mystery unfolded so slowly, but so deliciously. You get little bits and pieces and hints, and it just flowed really well. Beautiful, lyrical writing. I was a little disappointed at the ending, but maybe just because I was sad that it was ending at all. But I still gave this one 5 stars. Loved it. And this copy is also very beautiful, just nice to hold. I think, if I'm remembering correctly, I think this book was also published under the title The Call of the Curlew. Not sure, but you might find it under that title. But I highly recommend this one. So that's what I finished reading. I am currently reading and almost done with a couple of books. So as you know, I've been doing, if you've been watching these Friday Reads videos, I've been doing reading 1 short story, 1 poem, and 1 essay a day. And so I'm slowly making my way through those books. Almost finished with this poetry anthology, poetry collection, Museum of Distance by Ashley Seitz-Kramer. The line that I really liked this week is from a poem called New Histories, What to Do with My Arms. The line is, you come home, but I don't know what to do with my arms. Kind of made me think quite a bit. So almost done with this one. I'll probably finish that this week. So I've got another poetry collection lined up. Then my short stories, I've been reading through the best of Richard Matheson. Richard Matheson is a horror science fiction writer, most famous for I Am Legend, which I have not read, but I've heard of pop culturally. But the stories are very good, very creepy. And one of the stories that I really enjoyed this week was called The Last Day, and it was about the last day on Earth. I think it's a meteor is filling the sky. It's so close to the planet. It's about to hit. Everyone knows it's their last day, and everyone reacts differently. There's a lot of horrible things that people are doing because they can. And then there's also some really sweet things. And it's just kind of people dealing with the faith issues, morality issues, ethical problems, what is going to happen to them after they die. It was really tender for one of his scary stories. It's still very scary, but there were some super tender moments. So I appreciated the kind of contrast between the sweetness and the horror. Still enjoying those stories though. My essays I've been reading have been Alberto Manguel's The Library at Night. And so these are essays about the history of libraries, the history of bookkeeping, book collecting, book writing. So fascinating. He's so smart. Does a lot of research. And one of the things that stood out to me from this collection this week was that libraries have been written about in books, and people kind of invented library books. For example, Charles Dickens famously had a couple of false bookshelves that hid a secret door in his home, and he couldn't just let those false books stand on the bookshelves. They would move to reveal the door. He couldn't just let them stand there blank, so he wrote in kind of tongue-in-cheek titles that I thought were kind of amusing. If I can find it really quickly, I'll share a couple of the titles. Volumes 1 to 19 of Hansard's Guide to Refreshing Sleep, Shelley's Oysters, Modern Warfare by General Tom Thumb, and a 10-volume catalog of statues to the Duke of Wellington. It's kind of funny, but it was really interesting to think about all the fake books that people have written about as they populate libraries in stories in fiction, and how we will never get to read those books. And so that was a really interesting kind of thought concept game for my brain to think about all those fake books. Okay, so I'm also currently reading My Life in Middlemarch by Rebecca Mead. This is part memoir, part literary criticism, part literary biography. I'm learning a lot about George Eliot, or Marianne Evans, which was her real name. So far I have read about her kind of growing up years and how those influenced particularly Dorothea Brooke in Middlemarch. But I'm also getting kind of bits and pieces of her other writings, and I haven't finished everything by her yet, so I'm trying to avoid spoilers. But hot dang, is this making me want to just dive right into everything George Eliot has written. I own everything she's written, but I haven't read it yet. So I'm really excited to move on once I finish this book. And I'm hoping to incorporate George Eliot into some of my Victober reading in a couple months. If anyone else is excited for Victober, please comment below. I'm really loving this. I'm still working my way through South Riding by Winifred Holtby. I'm just luxuriating in the writing. Her writing style is very, it's very descriptive. Lots of landscape. She clearly loves the country of South Riding. So I'm really enjoying that. The snippets that we get of different characters' lives, the horrible things they do, the wonderful things they do, the hard things they have to go through, the kind of political intrigue that happens in local politics is really fun to me. It's a pretty good escape as well. but there's still like familiar things happening. This is set in the interwar years, and so I know as a reader what's going to happen next to these people, and as they're kind of reflecting back on the First World War, and thinking about like, oh, I'm so glad that that's over with, and the reader knows that other things will happen, but it's just really enjoyable to watch how they are dealing with the time period that they live in, and especially like the contrasts in class situations and poverty, and the change of some of the riches in this time period as the Depression really hits, and how some people who were rich are now becoming poor. So I'm loving Winifred Holtby so far. Last, I am listening to the audiobook of Alexander McCall Smith's The #1 Ladies Detective Agency. This is a story of Ma Ramotswe, who is a single woman in Africa who runs now her own detective agency, and the kinds of mysteries that she has to solve are so interesting. They're so different compared to the typical kind of English or Canadian crime novels that I read. So I love the unique setting and the unique people that the detective gets to encounter. Especially there was an instance where she had to take out a crocodile that was involved in a crime. So fun. Loving this book. All right, those are what I'm currently reading. Now, for the next week, I'm anticipating to finish some of these books and pick up more books. So I don't know if I'll get to all of these within the next week, but I'm sure hoping to start them. For poetry, since I'm trying to continue reading a poem a day, I would like to pick up Carrying Over, which is edited by Carolyn Kizer. This is a collection of poems from the Chinese, Urdu, Macedonian, Yiddish, and French African, which are all poetic cultures that I do not read anything in. I mean, I've read a little bit of Chinese poetry before, but none of the rest. And I'm excited to kind of look at new kinds of poetry, new to me kinds of poetry. And some of them are just translated. Others are posted kind of side by side. So this is the French African page, French, and then this is the English translation. And I've been learning French, so it'll be kind of interesting to kind of compare. I love doing that with Spanish poetry, which I do read Spanish. So it's fun to kind of increase my own vocabulary and my own appreciation for a language by doing that. But so I'm looking forward to picking this up. Also looking forward to picking up for essays, because I think I'm not sure, I haven't counted how many essays are left in Alberto Manguel's collection, but I anticipate that will be running out soon. So I'm looking forward to picking up Alice Walker's collection called In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, Womanist Prose. So Alice Walker is a Black woman who wrote The Color Purples, which her most famous production was. This is from the early 90s, so it's a little bit dated, but it should be interesting, at least from a historical point of view, to see what was going on in kind of feminist, womanist movement in the 90s and compare it to things that are happening currently about 30 years later. So I am so excited to read some womanist writing. And last but not least, I'm hoping to pick up a sci-fi book that's been on my TBR for a long time. It is Doomsday book by Connie Willis. This is the story of a female scientist, historian scientist. She's going to travel back to the 14th century to study firsthand history. So there's the science fiction element of time travel, but also like fantasies are usually what's set in the medieval times. So I'm really interested in what they're going to do with science fiction that's set in medieval time. But in the story, she gets trapped in the 14th century and her 21st century colleagues are trying to retrieve her. So because I've read a lot from the time period in which she will be traveling, I'm excited to kind of see what I recognize as familiar, what Connie Willis has done as far as research, and the Doomsday book itself. I'm really interested in, you know, the day of judgment and that kind of thing was really important in the 14th century, in the medieval times, but also, well, I guess it's kind of late medieval, but there's a plague, there's lots of diseases, right, in this time period, and that feels really familiar. Okay, also one more thing about this book. Because it's older, this little insert was included, and I think it was used as the original owner's bookmark, but it is this advertisement for, oh gosh, Sega Genesis, Disney's Aladdin, which I did play, not on a Sega, but I played it on maybe a Game Boy, like a handheld device. I can't remember what the handheld device was, but it has like little, you know, graphics. Oh, if you can see that, graphics of gameplay, which are kind of amusing to me because I recognize them. So that was a little treasure. I love finding these kinds of things in used books. So that's what I've read, what I'm reading, and what I'm hoping to pick up in the next week. What are you reading? Are you doing okay with quarantining or having, you know, dealing with the pandemic? I hope you are, but please tell me in the comments below. Remember, there's always another book.